All right, here we are inside the Lender Center. Chad Brendel, Tim Adams. Bearcats travel to the always exciting and fast-paced Provo, Utah for a game against BYU on Friday night. And Tim, how's this one looking to you?
Well, I think that a lot of the questions were regarding the UC health issues, and by the time we do this Saturday after the press conference, but by the time this will be aired on Friday, we really know that Johnny Holton, we did an interview with him, we know he's going to play. You know that Chris Moore is going to play. Both those guys. I thought Holton was the one I didn't think was going to play anytime soon because he had a brace on his knee as well as crutches 2 weeks ago. So, and Mike Boone's going to play, and they say he's healthy. So the Bearcat offense appears to be pretty healthy. That is the good news. But the bigger question is the quarterback situation.
Did you get a feeling from the press conference today that if there was a leader, it might be Hayden Moore?
I definitely think Hayden Moore is, after hearing the press conference, I thought that the groundwork was being laid for a Hayden Moore decision to start. I also, before I came here today, thought about, because I knew you would ask that question, and you always hear this terminology that you can't lose your job due to injury, and I don't believe that. I think that the best players play. That's another philosophy, is the best players play. And I think that opportunity presents itself through injury. You don't lose your job because you got injured. You lose your job because someone took an opportunity and played better. And as much as, Gunner was so good last year with 31 touchdown passes to 13 interceptions, and realistically it should have been 32 and 10, really, because I remember McKay dropping a wide open touchdown pass against Memphis. But that's a great season, but we haven't seen that from him all year, even going all the way back to training camp, when he just never seemed to air the ball out. And I was actually listening to Major League Baseball on Sirius Radio today, coming here, and they had the Texas Christian coach on, who had Jake Arrieta and the Carpenter from St. Louis. He was talking about how between 1 year and the next with Arrieta, he thought he had lifted too many weights and he had lost some of the velocity on his fastball. And that just rang with me a little bit with Gunnar Kiel. I just don't think he's thrown the ball nearly as well with his mud zip. He certainly hasn't even thrown the ball deep very much, whereas Hayden does.
I mean, we talked about that every day at practice throughout camp. Gunnar was running I don't want to call it a check down offense, because they were still throwing a little, 15, 20 yards. But then Hayden would come in, and all of a sudden, the ball's going over the top for 40, 50 yards in the air. And it was just a glaring difference from one guy to the next guy when they were there. And I think the thing that kind of maybe tipped Coach's hand in the press conference was bringing up that Gunnar threw all the interceptions against Temple and that he threw the pick six against Memphis when talking about the two of them and who was going to be the guy that played. I think he kind of tipped his hand a little bit there, saying, we love Gunnar, but he's kind of made these mistakes, and Hayden hasn't made those mistakes. And then right after that, he was asked
by Joe Danneman
how he's handled it, and he said not well. Mm-hmm. So I think, I'm surprised, because I thought when Gunnar was cleared, he would be given the chance to maybe go back out there. But it sure sounds to me like they are laying the groundwork for Hayden Moore to be the starter on Friday. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And we may have read things totally incorrectly there, but if the decision were mine, and this whole thing about it's open competition in practice. If you watch the weekly practices, you can't win a job in those 2 to 3 full practices. You just can't. There's not enough happening for you to do it.
No.
So I really think when you take a young man like Hayden Moore, who did play, I remember asking Coach during training camp about, is this kid having as good a training camp as what I'm seeing? And he brought up the point that Gunnar had the experience of getting him out of bad plays. And that made some sense to me. But as far as overall, and I've said it before with Gunnar, that I always thought he was a better game player than he was a practice player, and that was certainly what I thought was going to happen with this year. But he just hasn't been as good as I think he would like to. And I don't think you take a kid like Hayden Moore and sit him when he's played, just led you in the win over Miami, Florida.
Well, and really, Tim, this is kind of a pivotal decision long term.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you go right back to Gunnar, you're looking at Gunner for the rest of this year, half of a season, and then next year, his senior year. Where if you make the switch to Hayden now, you're kind of saying for the next 4 years, Hayden Moore is our quarterback.
Well,
Essentially.
you're certainly suggesting it. But, I'll go back to 4 years ago, 5 years ago with Everett Golson at Notre Dame. It certainly looked like he was going to be their quarterback for the next 4 years.
Lots can change.
A lot can change, including injury, obviously.
But at this point, that is kind of the message that you're sending, intentionally or unintentionally.
It sends a message that to a guy like Ross Trail, who came here and is redshirting this year, and if indeed Hayden Moore is that guy who's only 1 year ahead of Ross Trail, then that kid has to look at his situation and go, what do I do? Is this where I want to be? But again, a lot happens along the way.
Right.
This wouldn't be the first time. Hayden's gotten off. We've got a resume about this big on Hayden Moore right now, and he's really passed the test in most categories. But it's a big issue. It's the biggest issue, and we'll throw BYU situation in that, because Tanner Mangum came out and played very little in the third quarter, came out in the third quarter, played hardly at all in the fourth quarter until he came back in to engineer that 75-yard drive that was the clincher against East Carolina. So he's got the hamstring injury. Is he healthy? And then you've got Bo Hodge, the kid from Highlands High School, Merrill Hodge's boy, who didn't look very good in the limited play he had. So you got a 7-point line out there, and boy, there's some things that can really slide that thing one way or the other.
I mean, if you look at them the past 2 weeks, they got drilled against Michigan.
Everybody's getting drilled against Michigan.
The Harbaugh factor. But they did not look good in that game in the Big House at all. And they really, against East Carolina, I mean, they won the game, but you didn't walk away from that game thinking, man, they're really clicking right now on all cylinders.
Well, you look. I think they're 4-2. They could easily be 2-4 because the rest of the game they really should have lost. But they played a tough schedule too. Boise State, they won that one. They barely lost to UCLA, who was nationally ranked. UConn hung in there with them for a while before they.
It seemed like the UConn game that kind of started trending them down a little bit.
Well, for me,
in terms of the way that just the level of football that they've been playing.
If I want to try to defend them, I want Mangum to beat me with his arm, because they've got length on the outside, but they don't have speed on the outside. They've got the three kids that get all the publicity with being 6'5" or 6'6", but there's no burner out there. And so I think they've had 4, maybe even 5 different receivers lead them in receptions this year. So they've got a running back, Algernon Brown. I got to give credit for the Algernon, flowers for Algernon, the book. But he is not a bad runner. You got to shut down the run. I want to see if Mangum's in there. I want to see him try to beat the UC defense, because I'm not sure he can. I'm really not. I know he's had some big plays, but how many miracles can you pull out? And 3 of their 4 wins, they've won at the very end of the game.
Yeah, and they're walking off victories.
Yeah.
So, offensively, we talked about it a little bit. I know you in the interview, if you guys watched the interview with Johnny Holton, Tim touched on their defense a little bit, but you're maybe a little more bullish on their defense than most.
Yeah, when you think of BYU, you really think offense, and I think they've got some really big playmakers there. And you better polish up on your pronunciations.
No, you got your notebook. I'm going to let you have it.
Bronson Kafusi. And
Kafusi isn't too bad.
No, not too bad. But he's 6'8", 280 pounds, a defensive end. He's the guy that I think is going to be a pro. I mean, he has everything you want in a pro defensive lineman. Then they've got a couple of linebackers. They got Sione Takitaki. And Sione Takitaki
I bet he knows the haka.
He probably does. He's 6'2", 240 pounds. He's a kid that made some big plays for them last week against East Carolina. There's another Harvey Longy. And Harvey Longy's another 6'1", 240 pounder. He leads them in sacks. At the back end, they've got Kai Nakuna. And he's a big safety, 6'1", 213 pounds. He's got 4 interceptions this year. These guys have 10 interceptions and I think 3 fumble recovers, 13 takeaways. Opportunistic for sure, and Cincinnati's had a problem taking care of the football. I think if Cincinnati wins this game, they can protect the football. Another reason why, after the initial onslaught of turnovers by Hayden Moore, he did pretty well last week.
Yeah.
He made the 1 interception against Miami, but and then against Memphis, he had the 2 interceptions, but one of them was the desperation flick.
Right.
But I think the BYU defense is better than people are giving it credit for.
So overall, how do you look at this one? How do you think the Bearcats fare? Who's the starting quarterback, and what's the final score?
Well, it's so different from this was one of my losses when I picked 10 and 2. This was one of now Taysom Hill isn't going to play.
Right.
Tanner Mangum may not play. If Bo Hodge plays, then you gotta love Cincinnati's chances. I think it's going to be Hayden. Cincinnati's in a better spot because they've got two kids they don't mind running out there, whether it be Keel or whether it be Hayden Moore. So last week I went with or 2 weeks ago I went with Miami because I was one of the teams and the Bearcats won. I'm going to stick with my plan, and that I think in the beginning of the year BYU is one of my 2 losses.
So you're sticking
and I'm
with
also
it.
superstitious just enough to think that if I pick BYU, that these guys too, BYU, that I think I like Cincinnati's chances, but for the sake of everything that makes nonsense, I'm going to take BYU because I think that's going to help the cause.
I think I've struggled with this one because of the quarterback situation at BYU. But I think just being on the road out there makes it a tough environment for UC. I would take BYU by a score, 3 points, 4 points. I think 7 is high. I don't think they win by that much. But I do think just a long road trip, coming off a bye week. I hate coming off a bye week. Some coaches are great at it, and we don't really have a ton of evidence on how Tommy does because last year they didn't really have one. They had 2 bye weeks to start the season, and then 10 games in a row or whatever it was. I think BYU on a close one too.
But in this particular case, the bye week was important because it gets
They had to get guys healthy, absolutely. I mean, you've got Gunner available, Mike Boone available, Holton available, Chris Moore available. Those are 4 of your most explosive weapons now. Does Gunner play? We don't know. But those are, 3 guys, and your most explosive running back, and your 2, I guess you could put Mikhail McKay in there with those 2 as the biggest, big play threats. 2 of your top 3, deep ball threats or big play threats are back with Holton and Moore. So that obviously is very important.
Before we do end this, though, I do want to mention the game Alex Pay. I thought he was the best. I thought he was the best lineman on the field against Miami. Totally destroyed Alex Gall, the kid from Moore that started at left guard for Miami. And he and Broughton are going to be a big key to this. If they can make Mangum have to move with that hamstring problem, assuming Mangum plays, then I really, really like Cincinnati's chances. And people were banging on this defense, and I was one guy from the beginning saying I thought they'd be a lot better, and they're showing the capability of being better.
I tell you what, it is a good thing I'm not a gambler, because I probably would have lost everything on that Miami game.
What? Yeah.
Given the injury situation, given the way things were trending at that time, I would have had to go home Thursday night, wake up my wife and say, "Honey, we have to move tomorrow."
But that's
we
college
lost the
football.
house.
One of the things I said last week with them, this is college football. You just never know what's going to happen. One other issue I did want to talk about too was, people were talking about this team and being too light at quarterback with, after you had Hayden Moore, then maybe you're bringing in a real true freshman. You look around the country, see how many true freshmen are playing right now.
Yeah.
There are a ton of them. And it's just, part of it's because you've only got the 85 and you need those big guys. So you got to stop them.
Look at what happened here when Butch was bringing in 7 and 8 guys.
Well, we were light in other areas.
Well, not only that, but every year, guys 5, 6, and 7 started to see the writing on the wall. And you're constantly chasing that number because nobody wants to be the 6th quarterback on a roster.
No, you can't.
I mean, you look at it and you go, nope, I'm not going to pass him, I'm not going to pass him, I'm not going to pass him. I'm getting out of here. And that just makes it very difficult to keep that amount of guys. I mean, maybe you stash a guy at a different position, and if you need him, you move him back over. But, I mean, yeah, you would like it to be deeper than 2. But what, 3, 4, 5?
If you've got an established guy at quarterback, it's hard to recruit him at quarterback because the guy doesn't want to come in and sit. UCLA started a true freshman. South Carolina was starting a true freshman. Miami of Ohio is now playing Billy Ball. He had 4 picks against the Bobcats last week. But
you had to get that in there, didn't you?
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice to beat them. But, you go through the country. Well, Bo Schneider for UCF. Justin Holman goes down. He plays 3 straight games.
Louisville starting a true freshman.
Louisville starting a young kid. So there's just a lot of teams now that they're having to turn to true freshmen because you just can't stockpile guys.
Louisville's using true freshman strippers.
Isn't that something? Isn't that something?
I mean, when you got to go with true freshmen for your entertainment, I think you'd like to get a senior, somebody a little bit more experienced to.
Well, thank God Coach Pitino didn't know anything about it. Thank God for that.
I do believe, Macon, that I don't think Pitino knew anything about it, but head coaches have it kind of set up that way so that they don't know anything about it.
Well, let's face it, this guy's not a choir boy. Wasn't that long ago?
Hey, I'm not saying he's a choir boy. I'm saying plausible deniability.
He had his lap dances after hours in another bar.
Plausible deniability is a huge part of being a head coach in college sports.
Oh, absolutely it is. And if you're a husband, it still is too.
Yeah. Well, it goes like this. Recruit comes in and the coach says to whoever's in charge of the recruit, make sure they have a good time.
Yeah, I don't want to know about
right.
it. Make sure
I don't care how they have a good time. Make sure they have a good time. It sounds like they were having a lot of fun at Louisville.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I wish I had been recruited by the Cardinals.
All right, so we both got BYU. We're sticking with what we did last time that brought Cincinnati a win.
I am, for sure.
All right, so that means if they win, you've got to pick them to lose the rest of the year.
I know, that's the part that but you know what, I'm the team guy, I'll do that. My record's horrible anyway, I'm picking this.
Right.
I'm more about telling you who to look for in these games.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up. He's Tim Adams. I'm Chad Brendel, BearcatJournal.com.